Story 1. I was once cutting a piece of steel with a torch, and my pants caught on fire, much like the movie Liar Liar. I patted it out with a gloved hand and went back to work. Story 2. I removed myself and the items that were on fire from my home. I extinguished the fire with a heavy wool blanket that was kept on a bench outside. I did not stop, drop, and roll because it was oil on fire, and I thought the burning oil would ignite the carpet if I rolled around. Story 3. I was not on fire, but someone else was. They absolutely did not stop, drop, and roll. They panicked and ran around. We had to push them over and guide them to roll, all while yelling at them to stop and roll. Story 4. I was wearing only shorts and shoes. The petrol explosion that set me ablaze launched me several meters. I put out the fire on my hair and face with my hands. Throughout the flight, I was thinking, can't stop, drop, or roll. Now what? The absurd situation had me grinning by the time I hit the ground. I rolled a few times and the fire went out quickly. There were no scars, but recovery was painful. My eyelids wouldn't shut for 2 days. The skin around my elbows, knees, and mouth became crispy enough to split open. Story 5. I was an infant barely walking at the time, but I was told by my grandfather years later that after my older brother, then a toddler, suddenly pushed me into their open fireplace during a tantrum, my grandmother pulled me out and smothered my burning clothes and hair with her own body. Fuzzy homemade cotton clothes look cute on a child, but they become a human torch if they catch fire. Because of my young age at the time, I only remember the screaming, but it fully explained the forbidding steel cage my grandparents had in front of the fireplace when I was older. Story 6. Just calmly patted my hair until the fire went out, then proceeded to melt down because I was on fire. Story 7. When I worked in a welding bay with poor ventilation, it was too hot in the summer to wear welding leathers. I would regularly set the cheap overalls I wore on fire. You would notice it quickly, slap it out, and do a little burning shake to keep the hot material off your skin until it cooled. It was similar to the "oh no, hot slag in my pants" dance. Story 8. Fun times. One time, a bunch of friends and I went clubbing. One of them leaned in for a drunken kiss while holding a cigarette, which caught my hair on fire. We went from sloppily making out to smelling burning, to seeing the fire, and then him quickly hitting the side of my head to put it out. He was mortified. Luckily, I didn't lose much hair, and we all had a good laugh about it. To this day, whenever I see him, I joke that he is the only man who has ever truly set me on fire with a kiss. I don't think stop, drop, and roll would have helped in that situation. Smacking out the fire is what worked. I think it depends on where the fire is on your body. Story 9. I got a polyester Hawaiian shirt caught on fire while starting a grill on a windy day. Stop, drop, and roll did not help at all. I had to rip that thing off because it was melting to me. Do not wear polyester around sources of heat. Story 10. I did this once as a kid. The problem was that I was not on fire. A spark had popped from the fireplace and landed on my blanket, and it started to burn. Instead of letting go, I held onto it and tried to stop, drop, and roll with it. If there were a video, it would have been all over the Kids Are Stupid subreddit. Story 11. Got beaten up by my friends with towels and gloves. I was welding a go-kart frame when my shirt caught fire. Next, 3 of my buddies were hitting me trying to put me out. I thought they were just playing around and wrestling, so I started fighting back. They started yelling, I was yelling, we all got slightly burned, and they learned a lesson every welder eventually learns. Being on fire is terrible. Story 12. One time I reached across a gas stove burner and next thing I knew, my entire sweater was covered in blue flame, possibly from dry cleaning fluid residue. I was a nanny at that time, and my first thought was, I cannot burn to death in front of these children, but the flame disappeared in a second, and I was left shaking and wondering if I had just hallucinated. 40 years ago, and it still gives me that sick feeling in the pit of my stomach when I think about it. Story 13. I reached over a candle and my long sleeve caught on fire. I stopped, dropped, and rolled between my friend's bed and bookcase. It worked. Story 14. My brother-in-law's linen shirt caught fire after coming into contact with a sparkler on my birthday cake. He ran to the grass, dropped, and rolled continuously, but it took a long time to extinguish. In hindsight, we think it was partly due to rolling too quickly, so the fire on his stomach area wasn't smothered for long enough. It traumatized his children, and he ended up in the hospital with skin grafts. Story 15. I had someone jokingly set the flannel shirt I was wearing on fire once. I recall lowering my head and turning it to the side slightly while mouthing under my breath, "This idiot." A few seconds later, the individual had put out the fire by frantically slapping my torso while apologizing profusely. So, I guess I did nothing to put it out myself. Story 16. I hit the top of my head a lot. Stop, drop, and roll do not work very well if the top of your head is on fire. Teenage boys can be a menace. My hair was set on fire with a lighter because a kid thought it would be funny. It was not funny. I never talked to those guys again. They were my friends. Story 17. I was 11 years old. It was at a Boy Scout camp, and a kid from another troop was playing with camping fuel in a cup over the campfire. I walked up to see what was going on, and before I knew it, the flames climbed up the fuel and into the cup. Instead of dropping the cup into the fire, he turned and threw the contents directly onto me. I did what any 11-year-old who is suddenly on fire does. I ran until someone tackled me and put the flames out, either by rolling me or using a jacket. I don't even know who did it, but I think it was an adult. You think you'd stop and think, what am I supposed to do? Oh yeah, stop, drop, and roll. But what really happens when you're just walking around and suddenly on fire is, this hurts. Run away. Neither the kid nor his parents visited me in the hospital to apologize. I assumed that he and his friends lied to everyone and said I was the one messing around with the camp fuel. Story 18. Sprayed my flaming shirt with water from the nearby sink. Only wear loose natural fibers in the kitchen. Polyester ignites quickly like it is soaked in gasoline. Story 19. Luckily, I was wearing Nomex coveralls when the rig blew. I still received many appendicular burns, now keloids. I lost my left hand as well, but the jumpsuit saved most of my skin. Story 20. I have never been on fire, but when I was 5 years old, they made it seem like it was going to be a monthly occurrence. Story 21. In my experience, if the explosion is sufficiently large, you do not have to think about it. You will be stopped, dropped, and rolled. Story 22. As someone who was on fire, I first paused all activities. I then proceeded to abruptly meet the ground in a horizontal stance. I followed up by moving myself across the ground by rotating my body and moving in the necessary direction. Story 23. Only my hand shook. It wasn't going out. I said, "Oh no," and put it out between my knees. The pain was worse than getting my hand caught in a belt grinder, but not as bad as coughing while drinking ginger beer. Story 24. My brother, who set me on fire, threw me to the ground. I tried rolling, but the fire did not go out because it was still burning hairspray. I probably could have properly smothered it instead of rolling frantically, but I was 9 years old and panicking, so it is not surprising that I did not behave perfectly. After a few seconds of rolling, I got up and took off my pants, which made the fire go out immediately. If you get a bad burn, your skin may bubble up like a swamp. To prevent infection, the emergency room nurse pops the bubbles and pulls off the dead skin with tweezers. It is quite unpleasant. Story 25. My sister was near a fire that exploded when we were camping with Girl Scouts. She got away from the fire and then absolutely stopped, dropped, and rolled. It completely worked to extinguish the fire, but she did end up with second and third degree burns on her legs. Story 26. When I was in college, some friends and I had a bonfire on someone's rural property. We had been using a golf cart to get back to the house. We were all sitting in a circle around the bonfire, and it was cold, so I had a blanket around me. One of the guys had been drinking a lot and was going back to the house, presumably for more drinks. He thought the golf cart was in reverse, slammed the accelerator, ran into the back of my chair, and drove me, my blanket, and chair into the bonfire. The blanket I had wrapped around me smothered much of the fire, but I was also under it. The golf cart trapped my leg, so I could not get out. It all happened so fast it took a minute for anyone to realize I was in the middle of the fire. My boyfriend at the time grabbed my hand, pulled me out, and we patted the flames out on my jeans. Then I got into a bath of ice water. For anyone wondering, I was lucky to come out of it with relatively small first, second, and third-degree burns on the palm of my right hand, my right knee and hip, and the back of my right thigh. That was 18 years ago, and the scars are negligible because most of the burns were on joints, which do not build up scar tissue. Story 27. 1. Walked away from the group because I didn't want to deal with social embarrassment and threw everything out of my pockets. Kicked off my shoes for some unknown reason. Oh, that's hot. 3A. Started pulling off my still-burning shirt. 3B. Got stuck with it half off one arm and my hands stuck in the sleeves. 3C. Remembered that I have severe coordination difficulties. 3D. Ow, my hands, back, and legs hurt. 3E. What am I supposed to do? 3F. Remembered Homer and Abe Simpson rolling on the floor after setting their house on fire. 3G. Rolled back and forth as I pulled the shirt off. Great success. In a situation like that, it's amazing how much time you actually have to consider your options. Story 28. My uncle was working on some farm equipment and caught fire. He said he remembered thinking he couldn't drop and roll because he had just had rotator cuff surgery, but he immediately realized that should not be his primary concern because he would die if he did not put the fire out. So he did stop, drop, and roll. He still ended up with third-degree burns over his entire torso, both arms, and some of his face. Some of the burns on his hands were down to the bone. He spent a few months in a burn unit, received multiple skin grafts, but healed up pretty well. His most interesting fact from all of this was that when he was in the burn unit and basically had no skin, he said it felt like a fan was blowing on him at all times and he was very cold, because we do not even realize how much our skin regulates body temperature until it is gone. Story 29. When I was a kid, I saw an older kid cover his hand in rubbing alcohol and light it on fire, and it didn't burn him. I thought that was very cool and tried it myself. It worked fine with no problems. Fast forward more than 20 years, I tried to show my children this trick last summer, and it burned me badly. First, I flailed my hand, which only made the fire hotter. Then I thought, if I sit on my hand, it will suffocate the fire. I was telling myself to be calm, not to panic, and to keep it together or the situation would get worse. I thought I was doing a good job, but I ended up pulling my own legs out from under myself so fast that I slammed to the ground and hurt my wrist from the angle I landed. The fire went out on its own as I sat there burned and injured. Great times, 9 out of 10 would not recommend. Story 30. I exited the burning camper and dumped a bucket of stagnant old rainwater on my head, refilled it with the hose, and repeated. It was not the ideal reaction. I was not calm. Story 31. I stopped, dropped, and rolled while my children absolutely lost it. It was a kitchen incident. A bathrobe sleeve caught on the gas burner, and fire traveled up the sleeve and across my back. I turned my head instinctively to look behind me at my screaming children. Still grateful my face did not burn. Rest in peace, red bathrobe. My children are now teenagers and still occasionally bring it up. Scared them. Story 32. When I was 5 or 6, my family was eating Thanksgiving dinner together at my grandmother's house. I reached for some food and accidentally touched a candle. I'll admit that being on fire is an exaggeration, but my uncle quickly took me to the kitchen and held my hand under cold water until he was satisfied. I don't remember being seriously hurt, but my uncle told me a few years ago that he does remember this event. Somehow I have no scar. Story 33. Just slapped the burning item of clothing until the fire went out. Setting my beard on fire was even more painful until someone poured a pitcher of 3.2% beer on my head. Note: flaming shots are not supposed to be drunk while actually on fire. Story 34. I asked a fire instructor which extinguisher to use on a person who is on fire. His answer was if there is more than one to choose from, then take the lightest one because quite possibly you would have to run after them since their first instinct is to flee. Story 35. I stuck my hand and sleeve under the kitchen sink. I managed to light my sleeve on fire and douse the flame before it had a chance to get worse. That felt more sensible. Story 36. I was wearing water-wicking pants. It turns out the pair I had were highly flammable. I tried stomping out a fire, and my pants erupted in unnatural flames. I ran a short distance and began to roll on the ground. The flames went out quickly, possibly because the flammable coating on the pants burned up by then. Story 37. Freaked out, I slapped at my burning shirt with my hand, shrugged it off, dropped it on the floor, and stood there feeling very stupid. Story 38. A boat motor explosion launched me into the water. Thankfully, I still suffered third-degree burns on my face, and my ears were severely burned. Story 39. I was in a forest brush fire in Cyprus. The bottom of my trousers caught fire, but I quickly knocked off the flames and continued to help put out the fire. I didn't really think about the risks until a long time after, probably due to an adrenaline rush. Story 40. My hair caught fire while smoking as a teenager. I noticed, but my friends did not. They just saw me smack myself in the head repeatedly and then asked why I was hitting myself. My bangs were damaged for a week, but otherwise, everything turned out okay. Story 41. I did not. Instead, I immediately ripped off my clothes. Luckily, denim is somewhat flame-resistant. The ground around me was also on fire because of pouring gasoline onto a lit fire. I would not recommend it. Story 42. Reminds me of a time when I was at a party where they were doing flaming Dr. Pepper shots. For people were doing it and I was watching. After they took the shot, I told one of the guys that he was on fire. It was loud, so I repeated that he was on fire. He looked down and saw flames on his hand. He casually shook it until the fire went out. Story 43. I was the person who accidentally set himself on fire in the chemistry laboratory in college. I used the safety shower. The water had a strong, unpleasant odor. Story 44. My shirt caught on fire when I was a child. Let me tell you, when you are on fire and panicking, you do not remember to stop, drop, and roll. I was fine though. Someone patted out the fire, and there was a small hole in my shirt for the rest of the night. I know I was a child, but I am kind of annoyed with myself for not thinking to just jump in the lake that was literally 5 feet from the campfire. Oh well, I survived to adulthood anyway. Story 45. I lived in a rural area. My mother wanted me to burn trash. It was winter. I put on my snow jacket, boots, and trudged across the driveway to get it done. Unbeknownst to me, she had lost a battery among the clutter she had accumulated. I got a small fire started, then dumped the bag she gave me. I cannot remember exactly what I heard, the casing of the battery cracking. I spun around and took a step to run away from the barrel. I was thinking, this is going to blow. I wasn't quick enough. It hit my back with enough force to make me fall forward. I fell into the gravel. I used the momentum from accidentally falling to roll in and out of the snowbank. My jacket was full of holes. I probably would have panicked more if it had not been for the jacket and snow. I was already picking myself up when my mother came out because of the explosion. It was not the first time I had caught on fire for her. I was told to be aware of dangers and not to do that again. Story 46. I was helping out with a controlled fire once, and my friend yelled, "Dude, you are on fire." Then he squirted water on my flaming boot, putting it out before I could even process it. Story 47. Someone threw kerosene across the bonfire near me. It ignited in the flames in the air and landed on my leg. It went down my left boot and caught my leg on fire. No amount of kicking or moving helped. After almost a minute, my friend poured his beer on it, and the fire went out. I suffered second and third degree burns and couldn't walk for about 2 weeks. I was on crutches for a while. Story 48. Too long a story to type out, but I had gasoline on my jeans and they caught fire. I tried to stop, drop, and roll, but it was not working, and I could feel the pain increasing. I pulled my pants down and jumped out of them after about 5 to 10 seconds of rolling. I still had pretty bad burns on both of my lower legs. Kids, do not play with gasoline. Story 49. It has happened a couple of times. I kept juggling. It went out on its own. Once it was my beard, and the other time it was my pants leg. My juggling partner rolled a torch off the top of his head to start juggling. It lit his head on fire and he kept going. I was fueling my torches behind him. I got up and smacked his head. He said thank you and never dropped a torch. Felt good to be thanked for slapping him. Story 50. I actually stopped, dropped, and rolled. I was surprised I had the presence of mind to do so. I still had third-degree burns on the side of my face and arms, as well as melted under armor hoodie material I had to pull from my arms and neck. Had I not done what was taught to me more than 20 years earlier, it would have been a lot worse. Story 51. Yelled a curse repeatedly while waving my arm like a mad woman until a fast-thinking coworker threw a wet dish towel on my arm. Story 52. I was by an open fireplace when the leg of my pajamas caught fire. Took me a moment to realize what was happening. I stared at it for a second or two before saying, "Oh," and slapping out the flames with my bare hands. Fortunately, the pajamas were baggy. The flames went about 7 inches up my leg, but my skin was barely singed. Story 53. I got hit in the face with a flaming marshmallow, just like in Dennis the Menace. My clothes caught fire, and the first thing I did was stop, drop, and roll. Yes, that did nothing. Story 54. Stop, drop, and roll worked best when my brothers and I used to light each other on fire with kerosene. Story 55. I was not on fire, but flames were coming through the window where my robe was when I grabbed it. I noticed it was not on fire and ran. I would have run out of the house naked, almost did, before stop, drop, and roll would have even crossed my mind. Story 56. I had a friend in college who was in a house fire as a young child. I do not know what she did. I think she was 5 or 6, but she lost her dominant hand and ended up with a lot of severe scarring. So stay safe, everyone, and try to avoid catching on fire. Change your smoke alarm batteries. Story 57. Like most Generation X kids, I was unsupervised. When I was 11 years old, I was playing outside with gasoline. The plastic milk jug that contained gasoline caught fire. It scared me so badly that I threw it down, only for my swim trunks to catch fire too. In that moment of panic, a scene popped into my head with Dick Van Dyke and the dog, where it explained what to do if your clothes catch fire. I clearly remembered the line, "Roll, Dick, roll." So that's exactly what I did. I dropped to the ground and rolled. Story 58. Frantically shook my foot around until my burning shoe flew off. I was 17 and it was my first time drinking. I did not drink again for years. Story 59. I have been on fire a few times. I used stop, drop, and roll each time, but I was not really panicked because it was intentional. Story 60. Caught a rag on fire once. I dropped it on my floor and started stomping on it. It did not work, so I poured a glass of water on it. Story 61. I smacked my lap until it stopped smoking. I was welding when a spark landed in a hole in my worn coveralls. I didn't notice until after I finished the weld and lifted my helmet visor to check. Luckily, it wasn't a large fire, and I wore thick gloves that protected my hands. On other occasions, a spark melted a pocket in my phone screen while it was in my pocket. Unless I wore a beanie or skull cap, overhead welding always left me smelling like burnt hair for a while. High school shop was fun. Story 62. I was wearing a hoodie while learning to weld overhead. It was a poor decision in hindsight. A spark caught my hood on fire. I didn't notice until the person next to me saw it and started smacking me to put it out, just as it began to get really hot. Story 63. Quickly shook out the fire on my glove, threw down the rag I was holding that was also on fire, and stamped it out. Story 64. I was sprinting about 30 feet towards the nearby river when I was suddenly tackled and hit with a polyester jacket. Story 65. Slap my head a bunch of times like a lunatic. Stop, drop, and roll does not do much for the top of your head. Story 66. A friend caught fire at a campfire. He did not follow the plan. Instead, he screamed and ran, waving his arms. A few friends had to chase him down and tackle him to the ground to put out the flames. Story 67. I was a child and caught my face on fire when some gas exploded. I stopped, dropped, and rolled. I had third and second-degree burns all over my face and lost a good amount of hair. I do not remember much else because I blacked out from shock or pain, I guess. Story 68. Holding a birthday cake and lighting the candles while wearing a sweater. My arm caught on fire. I panicked and threw the cake against a wall. Two girls who were trying to help ended up hurting my arm. I ate cake on the ground. It was also a Hannah Montana cake for a 20-year-old. Story 69. A fellow bartender doused me in 151 proof rum, then lit me on fire as a prank. My whole left side was on fire. I grabbed the soda gun and doused myself. The person was rolling on the floor laughing the whole time. Story 70. Being an adult has resulted in fewer times when I needed to stop, drop, and roll than I was led to believe as a child. Story 71. I have caught fire a couple of times. The first time was my pants. I whipped off my jacket and smothered it. The second time was my shirt. I stopped and rolled around because I was on a creeper. That has happened twice. Story 72. Not quite that move, but the same principle. Only the front of my chest was on fire, so I ran up to a gigantic I-beam and just pushed up against it and bear hugged it to snuff it out. You would think they would give workers in factories, where all they produce are sparks and explosions, fireproof uniforms, but it was probably 10 cents cheaper a week for the standard. Story 73. Stared at it, went to pat it out, then realized I had a book of matches in my hand and that patting fire with matches would end badly. It took me a painfully long time to realize I could just drop the matches. Story 74. With my right arm and head on fire with gasoline, flight mode turned on automatically, and I ran around in circles blind, making whoop-whoop noises until I was tackled and the fire was put out. My mind wasn't present to consider any sort of training. It took years to fully recover and, quite honestly, it was the most pain I have ever felt. Not the burning part, but the recovery part. Pain so great you mentally check out and see this other person in pain until a rush of unconsciousness hits you. You wake up a few minutes later with just excruciating pain. Morphine does not make the pain go away. It just makes you consider your condition from another, less present, perspective. Story 75. When in danger or in doubt, run in circles, scream, and shout. Not intended as actual fire safety advice. Being on fire may not be right for you. For fires lasting more than 4 hours, please consult your doctor. Story 76. I tried to light a stream of Everclear from the pool deck to the pool. Unfortunately, I kept the bottle in my hand. As the flame shot onto my leg, a friend calmly pushed me into the pool. Story 77. As I stood in my friend's apartment kitchen, with parts of his engine in the sink, a tin of paint thinners open on the countertop, and aerosol cleaning solvents in hand, being sprayed liberally into the unclean part, I heard that unmistakable woof sound as the aromatic petrochemicals engulfed me and my surroundings in a fireball. The entire fire lasted 20 seconds, both in slow motion and over instantly. The kitchen was on fire, the sink was on fire, the thinners were on fire, everything. I scrambled to put everything in the sink, turned on the tap, and started to extinguish the flames. Afterwards, I realized my shirt was still on fire and I was getting hurt. My friend stripped me from the waist up and threw me into a cool shower. Somehow, there was no property damage and I only had superficial burns. The worst realization was that we did not have the car to drive me to the hospital, as the rocker cover and valve assembly were in the sink. We managed to find me a spare set of clothes, and a bit burned, we reassembled the car. Story 78. I stopped and dropped. I didn't roll because it was my backside that was on fire after I backed into a propane heater. I was working in a tobacco barn in the middle of winter, so I was somewhat lucky to have been wearing 2 pairs of pants. Only the outer layer of jeans was burned, not the long johns or underwear. It was highly embarrassing, and my cousin still calls me Hot Pants. Story 79. I have never been on fire, but I did these drills in school, so I imagine I would panic, run around, jump, and scream. Story 80. I have caught my hair on fire several times. I usually hit my head where the fire is until it goes out. It works as well as it can. Story 81. My hair caught on fire on Thanksgiving. I am a woman and have had long hair for a long time, reaching the bottom of my shoulder blades or lower. I was helping in the kitchen at a friendsgiving and washing my hands frequently throughout the night. Someone had moved a candle onto the cluttered kitchen counter at some point. I reached across the counter to grab a paper towel to dry my hands, and the bottom front of my hair brushed over the flame and caught on fire. It spread quickly in microseconds, but I had wet hands, so I immediately patted my chest and snuffed it out. I feel lucky that I do not use hair products because that could have been a disaster. You could barely tell my hair had just caught on fire, and I got a trim to even up the sides with face framing layers. It was fine. A funny side note. About 2 minutes after it happened, one of my best friends in the living room yelled, "Ew, it smells like burnt hair in here." "What is that?" I poked my head around the corner and said, "My hair just caught on fire because someone moved a candle and did not put it back." Story 82. I wasn't on fire, but stop, drop, and roll didn't cross my mind. It was "oh no," while beating my head because my hair was burning. Story 83. Not me but my friend. He was hanging out around a campfire. He was drunk and got too close. His pant leg caught fire. Everybody yelled stop, drop, and roll. He did, and the fire went out very quickly. It worked for him. Story 84. At my 11th birthday party, my hair caught on fire as I was blowing out the regular candles. I ran in circles screaming while my mother chased me with a dish towel and my aunt threw cups of soda in my general direction. I lost my right eyebrow and eyelashes, and the hair on the right side of my head was about an inch long. Story 85. The young teenager who accidentally got too close to a candle at my wedding reception and found himself with his shirt on fire basically froze until the shirt completely burned off. Story 86. One time my boyfriend thought he was on fire from the grill blowing up in his face. He was fine, but his solution was to run through the screen door. Story 87. I was a kid who watched the Dick Van Dyke commercials, and when my shirt caught on fire from a candle, I ran out to the driveway, stopped, dropped, and rolled. I was too afraid of ruining my mom's carpet to do it in the living room. I would have heard about it for years. Anyway, I was fine thanks to the commercials. Story 88, stop, drop, and roll led me to believe that spontaneously catching fire was going to be a much bigger problem in life than it turned out to be. Story 89. A friend was once in Walmart when the power went out. Her young son threw himself on the ground and started rolling around. She said she just stood there, staring at him, until she finally collected herself and reminded him the power went out. He wasn't on fire. I thought at least he was paying attention. Story 90. I had a chemistry teacher who told us that if we ever see a person on fire, we should push them over. His argument was that no one ever stops, drops, and rolls. They just run around screaming. Story 91. At a cookout, I got splashed with burning lighter fluid. I grabbed a towel nearby and wrapped it. I am naturally a very calm person, so it was pretty uneventful, honestly. Story 92. This happened to me 47 years ago. I had a small accident at our family farm. A family member was pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. I was mesmerized by the fire. I was 4 years old. Apparently, when they poured gasoline on the fire, the fumes ignited, and they threw the gas container into the fire. The container rolled through the fire and landed at my feet. I started running around. From what I hear, I was screaming, and an uncle clotheslined me as I ran by and put me out with a jacket. I don't remember anything. I woke up 3 weeks later in the hospital with bandages around my leg and bandages around my other thigh where they took skin for a skin graft. All I remember is that removing the bandages from my skin graft hurt more than removing the bandages from the burn. On a positive note, I got a prominent scar that takes up an entire leg. It is a great conversation starter. Story 93. I was bartending and working as a barista in -21-degree weather outdoors. So I had a few propane heaters set up around me. I had a towel hanging out of my back pocket that drifted a bit too close while I was reaching down to fetch milk from a cooler. I felt my leg get really hot and realized my towel was on fire. I tossed it down and stomped it out. I still felt my leg was hot and realized the fire had crawled up my entire leg and back. I jumped into a pile of snow and rolled around. Essentially, it was just an added step to the usual routine. Thankfully, I was wearing a few layers, so I got away with some light burns and slightly singed hair. I finished my shift after changing into a spare coat. Story 94. Father put a lot of lighter fluid on the logs and told me to light it. As I tossed the match in, he told me to wait a second for the fumes. I was engulfed in flames and instantly dropped to the ground and rolled. It was like instinct for me. My eyebrows, hair, and eyelashes were burned, but I was okay. Story 95. When we were kids, we went on a family camping trip. Long story short, my brother, who was no older than 12 at the time, was wearing long pants that caught fire. He panicked and ran around the campsite screaming. If I remember correctly, he was tackled by a man in a neighboring campsite who then smothered the flames. No one was hurt, and thankfully all the fire was put out. It was a quiet, somber night of camping after that happened. Story 96. I stuck my hand in the river. We were several miles into the wilderness, hiking along a river and fishing. I slipped into the river at one point, and since it was winter, we decided it was best to build a fire to help dry my pants and warm me up. There I was on the bank, huddled next to the fire with my pants hanging on a stick even closer to the fire. A stray wind blew my pants directly into the fire, and they caught fire almost instantly. When I tried patting the fire out, I discovered the threads were more plastic than fiber and they stuck to my hand, still burning. That's when I dunked my hand in the river. I ended up hiking back upriver with those burnt pants. The whole crotch had melted, which made the hike colder and a little scratchy. Story 97. Once, I burned my hand on the stove and just screamed while doing the chaotic chicken dance. Stop, drop, and roll was nowhere in sight. Story 98. The brain did not engage for a second. I just stood there staring at my arm, not panicking, just staring. Then, when I registered what was going on, I said, "Oh no," and then patted it out. Story 99. I ran to the grass, then stopped, dropped, and rolled. Back, shoulder, neck, and ear. It didn't really hurt until the skin started knitting back together. 100% do not do a barbecue after a 3-day session. Story 100. My mom had a candle in her hand, bent down to put on her shoe, and set her hair on fire. She started smacking her head with her free hand, and I think my grandmother was smacking her with a towel. She had a good-sized chunk burned out of her hair. Story 101. When I was in school and they taught this, I thought they meant to stop, drop, and roll if the building was on fire. It was obviously my misunderstanding. I am sure I was not paying full attention. But in my head, I was like, I am not doing that. Story 102. I was a preteen playing in the woods next to the train tracks. Luckily, it had rained recently, and the ditch had water in it. I hopped right in and cooled myself off. Story 103. I do not think I have ever done the stop, drop, and roll technique. Each time, I just patted the area until the fire went out, which was usually quite quick. Story 104. I caught my pants on fire as a child and performed the stop, drop, and roll technique in the grass. I still got pretty burned, but it did put out the fire. Story 105. Not me, but my friend caught her sweater on fire while we were together. She dropped into stop, drop, and roll immediately like a reflex. It worked perfectly. Story 106. My friend accidentally threw some burning gasoline on my chest. I stopped, dropped, and rolled almost immediately. The fire went out. Felt like a sunburn. Story 107. The halo of fuzz on my friend's Angora sweater caught fire from a dinner candle. I grabbed her arm to wrestle her to the ground, but instead we both watched, fascinated, as a ring of flame went up her arm, burning only the fuzz, and then extinguished. Then we finished dinner. Story 108. A piece of hair caught on fire when I was given flaming sambuca for my birthday shots. I quickly patted it out in a panic and had some burnt hair. Story 109. I stood surprised while the parish priest reached over and patted out the fire that had started on my altar girl robe. Technically, it was my special Christmas mass tassels that caught on fire. Honestly, I was a quiet observer, holding a torch and watching this rescue as it happened to me. My clothes were a little singed, but the priest continued to process in after the fire and smoke subsided. I was unharmed. Story 110. I screwed up lighting my grill and a fireball shot out at me. My first priority was running away because I did not know if more flames were coming. While running, I realized my shorts were on fire, so I batted them out with my hands. If anything else was burning, the speed of running must have put it out. The fire mostly hit my arms and burned off the hair on them, but not much remained on fire. Story 111. I was carrying a birthday cake when my hair and sweater caught fire. I did not notice. My uncle saw it while we were singing Happy Birthday and was able to pat out the flame. I still wonder at what point I would have realized it. I am not surprised to have recently been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Story 112. I sat there confused about what was going on until everyone around me had put the fire out. I was at a fireworks display when a firework landed on my hair while still burning, and my hair caught fire. I didn't know what was happening. It felt like my hair was being pulled more than anything, and then suddenly a lot of people started hitting me on the head with coats and picnic blankets, which was even more confusing. There was also a lot of shouting. I only found out afterward what had happened. Fortunately, I wasn't injured, just lost a bunch of hair. Story 113. Ran out, cried, and watched my warehouse burn down. After 30 minutes, I decided to rescue some documents and my computer. I thought I would run in and run out. Trust me, movies are nice and reality is harsh. I almost burned my eyeballs and did not get anywhere close to my objective. Story 114. Not me but my cousin. He was wearing a homemade costume of a sheep. He was careful to make sure the cotton was flame resistant, but he did not check the glue he used. An ash from someone's cigarette set his whole body on fire almost instantly. The bar had an attached apartment, and they pushed him into the shower. It took less than 30 seconds for the whole ordeal. He ended up with burns over much of his upper body and legs. He is fine now. No stop, drop, and roll. Story 115. When my husband set his face and arm on fire, he said he just started slapping it as best as he could. Story 116. Not my whole body, but my hair. I was in my room, had just used a bunch of hairspray, and leaned over a candle on my dresser to grab something. The whoosh sound was intense. The first thing I noticed was the smell of burning hair. I started slapping my head with my hands repeatedly. No stop, drop, and roll, just slapping the head. It worked, but the smell was disgusting, and I had one crunchy, burnt piece of hair I had to cut off. Story 117. Okay, so I might be the only one, but it actually worked for me. I was about 15 years old in a home economics class when my apron caught on fire from the gas stove. Our teacher was very strict about safety, and we had practiced fire safety drills before. So, honestly, the first thing that popped into my head was her voice screaming, "Stop, drop, and roll." I dropped to the floor and rolled once or twice while other students grabbed the fire blanket. It was over in seconds. Story 118. I set myself on fire while grinding down a weld. Everyone else around me was also grinding down welds, so we all had hearing protection on, and no one could hear me. There was a moment when I considered stop, drop, and roll, but I ended up patting myself out with the sleeve of my sweatshirt. Story 119. I ran as fast as I could with my arm on fire. I was a child working in a warehouse using flammable liquids. I ran into the parking lot with my coworkers trying to catch up with me. The fire burned itself out on my arm. There was a huge blister and the scars lasted for decades. I did not stop. I did not drop. I did not roll. Story 120. This question was made for me. I was on fire for the first time yesterday. I did not stop, drop, and roll. I panicked and stood still as my boyfriend smacked the burning marshmallow out of my hair. Pro tip: if you are toasting a marshmallow and it catches on fire, do not fling it up and down to get rid of the flame. You might catapult a burning marshmallow directly into your hair. I didn't burn much of it, but getting burnt marshmallow out of your hair is another story. Story 121. I ran my head under the tap for a while because I was not near a mirror and was not sure how much I was still on fire. I lost half my eyelashes just before a convention. Story 122. When I was 17, I was cutting some metal in my grandfather's shop when suddenly it got very bright and warm. I looked down and my leg was on fire. I froze and dropped the acetylene torch I was using and started shaking my leg. The fire went out quickly, but when I went to pick up the torch, which was still running, the nozzle was on the hoses. The tip was just past where the hoses would have been cut. I almost blew myself up after setting myself on fire. I then had to cut my leather boot off my foot because the shoelace and fake leather had melted together. My skin was fine with no burns or other injuries. Story 123. It really does not take more than a couple of seconds of being on fire to suffer severe damage. I know being on fire is dangerous for people, but how long do you truly have before it is past the point of no return? To make it easier to answer, let us focus on the face. Story 124. My hair caught on fire after I was hit by a firecracker when I was in 4th grade. It was one of those tanks you place on the ground, light, and it is supposed to roll away once it goes off and then explode. It never rolled away and exploded too close to me. I remember dropping to the ground, and my brother poured a bucket of water on me. Story 125. Not me, but a friend. When a group of us were playing fireball, he ripped his flaming pants off and then hopped around the street in his underwear while still screaming. There was also a time my nephew lit his hair on fire while blowing out birthday candles. He did not even notice and tried to stop me from patting his head until I told him I was trying to put out the fire in his hair. Story 126. First of all, I swatted at it with my hands, which did not work. At that point, my friend said, "Oh no, Randall is on fire." I did the stop, drop, and roll, which might have worked if it were not flaming adhesive on my pant leg. I tore out of my trousers with minor injuries. Story 127. Welding student here. I caught a winter jacket on fire that was over my fire-resistant gear while on a work placement for school. I realized it from the smell before the heat, cursed loudly, ripped it off, and stomped on it until it went out. I couldn't stop, drop, and roll because it would have caught something else on fire, no doubt. I still have the jacket. It just has a fist-sized hole in it now. Story 128. As an interesting aside, stop, drop, and roll has been found to cause more harm than good. It was taught so heavily that children believed they were supposed to stop, drop, and roll during a building fire, not just when they were on fire. Story 129. I did a stop, drop, and roll when I was a kid. I had model airplane fuel on my arm that ignited. I remembered the drill immediately and did it. It worked. Story 130. I was setting off fireworks in the country with a large, unsupervised group as a young teenager. It was, in fact, pretty stupid of us, and we thought it wouldn't matter to use the wrong size tube to shoot the firework out of. Well, it did. The tube fell over within moments of lighting the firework, and we all ran, laughing like a bunch of young fools. Of course, with the tube on its side, it shot the firework horizontally out rather than into the air, like a teen-seeking missile. Unfortunately, someone had to be the unfortunate bystander who got blasted in the back of the head with a firework. It was me. I stopped, dropped, and rolled in the grass the instant I felt a flash of something hot hit the back of my neck, right below my fluffy ponytail. All those years of having it drilled in worked for something, I guess. But, luckily, I had just gotten out of the pool and my hair was still very wet, or I'm sure I would have lit up like a Roman candle. I didn't catch fire, and I'm sure rolling and starving the flame of oxygen helped, but I was also very lucky. I was smoldering when I stood up and smelled like burnt hair for about 3 days. I'm sure it turned out the best it could have, considering how foolish we were being. Story 131. It didn't happen to me, but there was a man sitting at a campfire across from me who, for some reason, propped his feet on the fire pit. To no one's surprise, his pants caught on fire. I saw this and nonchalantly pointed at his legs, telling him this in a monotone voice. He said, "Oh shoot." Almost did the stop, drop, and roll method but ended up patting the fire out because it was just the cuff of his pants. I was asked why I didn't seem alarmed, and I told them if I panicked and tried to help, I would likely trip and fall into the fire myself. If he was struggling, of course I would get up and help, but I would not rush and put myself in danger if it could be avoided. Story 132. Shoes and the bottom of my pants caught fire. I stomped around in the deep snow surrounding me until the fire went out. This happened while hiking with scouts at age 12 because I was too close to the fire while cooking and warming up. The only thing I said while burning was, "JAH." To be fair, those shoes had a fuzzy fake fur that was likely flammable, so I only have myself to blame. Story 133. I was 9 years old. I was trying to use gasoline to stoke a campfire to impress a girl. I caught my arm and leg on fire. I panicked, but she remembered, stop, drop, and roll. So the damage was contained. My leg did not scar, but I still have a noticeable scar on my arm 37 years later. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.